Hello everyone and welcome back to Affinity for Commander. My name is Alex and today we are joined by two of our lovely patrons. Which reminds me, this channel is made possible thanks to the continued support of our lovely patrons. We could literally not do this without you. If you yourself would like to be on the channel and have a game with Martin and I, then be sure to check out our Patreon link in the description box below. As always, if you like any of the cards you see here today, then be sure to head over to Flipside Gaming to get an additional 10% off at checkout by using the promo code Affinity. Or if Card Market, Magic Madhouse or TCG Player are more your thing, then be sure to use our affiliate links in the description box below. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it really helps the channel out a lot. Now let's get into this battle of virulent discarding, Boros equipment, an angry angel, and some sphinxes, I guess. Asher is playing his Seizan Perverter of Truth hand-hate deck. His focus is to mess with our hand size, make us discard, and get value from doing so. He keeps an opening hand of Rograkh, Locust Miser, Macabre Revenant, Thematic Compass, and 2 Swamps.
Alex is playing his Feather the Redeemed Spellslinger deck. With Feather's ability, he wants to be throwing out value 1-drops to draw cards and buff his commander's power. His opening hand contains Sword of the Animist, Teferi's Protection, God's Willing, Mox Amber, Boros Signet, Rugged Prairie, and a Plains.
Nick is playing as Rograkh, son of Rograkh, and Ardenn Intrepid Archaeologist Equipment Voltron deck. The game plan here is to turn his 0-mana commander into something to be feared with heavy equipments equipped for free with Ardenn's ability. He keeps an opening hand of Rayav Master Smith, Burnished Heart, Open the Armory, Akroma's Will, Buried Ruin, a Mountain, and a Plains.
And finally, I am playing my Unesh Cryo-Sphinx Sovereign Sphinx Tribal deck. With Unesh out, I'm planning on dropping Sphinxes like they're going out of fashion and restocking my hand of those lovely Sphinxal Fiction triggers. I keep a hand of Guardian of Tazim, Chancellor of the Spire, City Watch Sphinx, Felwar Stone, Worn Power Stone, and 2 islands.
Asher has chosen to go first, but Martin has some pre-game effects.
I do indeed, dear. I use my Chancellor of the Spire's ability to make everyone mill the top 7 cards of their library. The table groans over their lost cards and Asher moves to his turn and the game can now begin.
You're too kind. Asher plays a swamp for turn and passes.
Alex plays a Plains and also passes.
Nick plays a Plains and ends his turn.
I play a Fancy Island and pass to Asher.
Asher plays another swamp and then casts Thematic Compass. He then passes to me.
In Alex's turn, he plays a Rugged Prairie and then taps both of his lands to cast Boros Signet. With Feather mana now at hand, he ends his turn.
Nick plays another Plains as his land and then casts Pure Steel Paladin. Out of mana, he passes to Martin.
I play another island and cast Felwar Stone.
Which does not tap for blue.
Yeah, well, mana's still mana. With nothing more to do, I pass to Asher.
In his turn, Asher plays a Reliquary Tower and then casts a Scroll Rack. Asher then ends his turn.
Alex begins his turn by playing Homeward Path. Then, wanting to be the first out of the gates, he casts his commander, Feather the Redeemed. Looking to leave mana open for future shenanigans, Alex passes to Nick.
For his turn, Nick plays a mountain, casts a Burnished Heart, and then ends his turn.
In my turn, I play an island and then cast Worn Power Stone. Using my last untapped island, I cast Pongify in an attempt to get rid of Feather. Alex responds to this by casting God's Willing, giving his commander protection from blue. He scries the top card of his library to the bottom and puts God Willing into exile. Plans foiled, I move to my end step, where Alex's spell goes back into his hand and Asher activates his Scroll Rack. Finally finding some lands to play, he proceeds to his turn.
Asher starts his turn off by playing a swamp and then casts Locust Miser, reducing each of his opponent's hand sizes by 2. Having ticked off the rest of the table, Asher moves to his end step, where I cast God's Willing on Feather, giving her protection from black. I scroll the top card of my library, which I keep on top, put God's Willing back into my hand, and then move to my turn.
Alex plays Opal Palace and then casts Sword of the Animist. He then equips the sword to his angel and moves to combat. Not liking having less cards in hand, Alex attacks Asher with his commander. His sword triggers, putting a mountain into play tapped, and Asher takes 4 commander damage. Satisfied with claiming first blood, Alex ends his turn.
For his turn, Nick plays a Buried Ruin, and then pays 2 mana to sacrifice his Burnished Heart to put a mountain and a plains into play tapped. He then passes to Martin.
In my turn, I play another island and then cast my commander, Unesh, Cryo Sphinx Sovereign. When he enters, he triggers Sphinx or Fiction, and I target Nick with the trigger. He puts Swiftfoot Boots and an island into one pile, and Rapid Hybridization and Prognostic Sphinx in another. I choose the pile containing the shoes, and then move to my end step where I discard due to Asher's Miser. With nothing more to do, I end my turn.
In Asher's turn, he taps 5 mana to cast his commander, Seizan, Perverter of Truth. He then passes to me.
Alex untaps and in his upkeep draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. He then casts Tethmost High Priest and moves to combat, attacking Asher once more, again putting another mountain into play with his sword. After no blocks are declared, Alex casts Psychotic Fury, doubling Feather's power, and draws a card. Asher then takes 8 more commander damage, and Alex moves to his end step. Here the Fury goes back to his hand, and he discards 2 cards due to the Miser. Nick then proceeds to his turn.
Nick draws 2 additional cards and loses 2 life. He plays a Clifftop Retreat and casts Rayav, Master Smith. Making the most of his turn, Nick also casts Darksteel Plate and draws a card thanks to his Paladin. Still not finished, Nick casts Open the Armory, using the tutor to find Commander's Plate. Nick puts the equipment into his hand, discards down to hand size, and then passes the turn to Martin.
In my turn, I also draw 2 additional cards and lose 2 life. I then cast Swiftfoot Boots and equip the shoes to my commander. Next I cast Guardian of Tazim, and with my Sphinx or Fiction trigger, I target Asher. He makes a pile containing 3 cards and a pile containing Reliquary Tower. Really needing the no maximum hand size ability, I put the tower into my hand and then play an island for turn. I use my Guardian's Landfall ability to keep Feather tapped down during Alex's turn.
Rude.
Moving to combat, I attack Alex with my commander, and lacking any flying blockers, he takes 4 commander damage. I then move to my end step where I discard 1 card and pass to Asher.
For his turn, Asher draws 2 more cards and loses 2 life. He then casts a Sword of War and Peace and equips the Metallic Fire Hazard to his commander. Moving to combat, Asher attacks Martin with his Miser and me with his sword-wielding commander. No blocks are declared, Martin takes 2, I take 8, and Asher's sword then triggers. I take 5 further damage and Asher gains 5 life. In Asher's main 2, I cast God's Willing, targeting my priest, giving him protection from black. This triggers their heroic ability, returning the runaway Steamkin in my graveyard to the battlefield. Moving to the end step, God's Willing returns to my hand, and I then proceed to my turn.
Alex draws 3 cards and loses 2 life thanks to Asher's commander. He then plays a Plains and moves his sword over to the runaway Steamkin. Wanting more heroic triggers, Alex also casts Anax and Siamede, which triggers his Steamkin, putting a +1/+1 counter on the elemental. He then casts Psychotic Fury, targeting the Lovers, which triggers their heroic ability, giving all of Alex's creatures +1/+1 and trample until the end of turn. The Steamkin gets another +1/+1 counter, and Alex draws a card from the Fury. Moving to combat, Alex attacks Asher with his kin, triggering the sword. Alex puts a Plains into play this way, and Asher takes 5 damage. Moving to his end step, Alex puts Psychotic Fury back into his hand, discards 2 cards, and ends his turn.
In Nick's upkeep, Asher activates his Scroll Rack, setting aside 2 cards and drawing 2 new ones. Nick then draws 3 cards and loses 2 life. He then activates and sacrifices his Buried Ruin to put the Colossus Hammer in his graveyard back into his hand. He then casts one of his commanders, Ardenn, Intrepid Archaeologist, followed by his massive hammer. Nick then casts his other commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. Moving to combat, Nick uses Ardenn's ability to attach his hammer and plate to his tiny goblin. He then declares an attack with his buffed up commander at Asher, who is then reminded that with Rayav out, that goblin now also has double strike. Asher with no responses takes 20 commander damage, tumbling down to a single figure life total. Upon reflection, we have noticed that Nick shouldn't have been able to do this, given that Rograkh does not have haste among his many key words. But rest assured, this does not have a significant effect on the outcome of the game. Nick then passes to Martin.
For my turn, I draw 2 additional cards and take 2 damage. I'm getting really sick of saying that. I then cast Sarah Sphinx, targeting Alex with Unesh's trigger. Alex makes 2 piles, and I select the one with an Island and Conundrum Sphinx to put into my hand. I then play a Reliquary Tower to ensure I no longer suffer the effects of Asher's Miser. This triggers my Guardian of Tazim, and I choose to tap down Inax and Cymede.
So rude.
I then tap 2 lands and cast Conundrum Sphinx, this time choosing Asher through Ness's trigger. From this I get just a Consecrated Sphinx into my hand.
Just a Consecrated Sphinx.
Yeah, just a Sphinx, don't worry about it. Speaking of Sphinxes, I then cast Sphinx of Dwar Isle. This time I let Nick choose my Unesh piles and put an Island and Enigma Sphinx into my hand this way. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with my Guardian and Unesh, and lacking any untapped flyers, he takes 8 damage. In my end step, I don't need to discard any cards as my hand size is now infinite, and infinity minus 2 is still infinity.
Quick maths.
With my full clutch of cards, I end my turn.
In Asher's turn, he draws 2 more cards and loses a third of his life total. Oof. He then moves straight to combat, attacking me with his Miser and Nick with his Commander. I block the Miser with my Leonin, and with his Commander having pro red and white, Nick is unable to block. The Miser is destroyed, Nick takes 8 command damage, and then Asher's sword triggers again, gaining him 8 life, and Nick loses a further 5 life. In his main 2, Asher plays a Jet Medallion, and then casts a Waste Knot. Looking to capitalise on his new enchantment, Asher casts Ill-Gotten Gains. I respond to this by casting Sheltering Light, targeting my Leonin, and use his heroic trigger to put a Chroma Crusader back into play from my graveyard. Sheltering Light then lets me scry a card, which I leave on top, and then the spell is then placed into exile. Just wanting to be careful, I also cast God's Willing on my commander, giving Feather protection from black until the end of turn.
Are you finished?
Well, I'm out of mana, so yes.
Good, because this is going to be absolutely hectic.
Everyone discards their hands, then returns 3 select cards from their graveyard to their hands. And in complete summary of all these triggers of discarding plus Waste Knot, Asher draws 8 cards, generates 8 black mana, and creates 5 2/2 zombie tokens. Still apparently wanting more mana, Asher casts a Dark Ritual. Using 4 of his floating mana, he then casts Kagemura, First to Suffer, causing both Martin and I to shudder with despair. Asher then activates Kagemura's ability, giving everything on the board -8/-8. Once the smoke clears, Rograkh is the only one left standing, although a bit smaller. Asher, really not wanting to die to command damage, pays 3 mana and casts a Toxic Deluge with X being 3. Asher loses 3 life and the goblin is finally destroyed. Using the last of his mana, Asher casts Blood Gift Demon and then moves to his end step. Here, Thematic Compass transforms into Spires of Orazka. God's Willing and Sheltering Light return to my hand, and I proceed to my turn.
Alex recasts his commander, tapping Opal Palace as well to have Feather enter with 2 +1/+1 counters on her. And with a handful of instances, Alex passes to Nick.
Nick begins his turn by paying a whole 2 mana to recast Rograkh. He then casts Commander's Plate and Kedis, Emberclaw Familiar. Lacking any more mana, Nick ends his turn.
I also begin my turn by recasting my commander. With Unesh's ETB trigger, I target Nick, and with this trigger I'm able to put an Island and Laboratory Maniac into my hand. I then equip my shoes to Unesh and pass the turn to Asher, who responds by activating his scroll rack before proceeding to his turn.
In Asher's upkeep, he targets Nick with his Demon's trigger, making him lose a life and draw a card. In his main phase, Asher plays a perfectly on-curve Soul Ring, which he then uses to help recast his commander, Seizan, Perverter of Truth. Asher then equips his sword to Seizan and moves to his end step. Here I respond by casting Psychotic Fury, merely just to draw a card, which I do. I then move to my turn, putting the Fury back into my hand.
Alex loses 2 life and draws 2 additional cards. He then plays a mountain and casts God's Willing, targeting Feather. I respond to this by casting Pongify, targeting the Angel. Alex responds to this by casting Sheltering Light, giving Feather indestructible, but Asher responds to this with a good old-fashioned murder. Desperately trying to dig for answers, Alex casts Psychotic Fury to draw a card, and he also casts Fists of Fury to draw yet another card. These, however, do not help, and Feather is brutally murdered. The Fury and the Fists are then put into exile due to Feather's ability, while the Shield and God's Willing are put into the grave as they did not resolve. Feeling rather bitter about this whole affair, Alex casts Dire Fleet Daredevil, targeting my Pongify. He uses the spell to destroy Asher's Blood Gift Demon, gifting him with a 3/3 ape instead. Moving to his end step, Alex puts the 2 red instances in exile back into his hand and passes to Nick.
In his turn, Nick loses 2 life and draws 2 more cards, and then plays a Wall Room as his land for turn. He then taps 5 mana to recast Ardenn and moves to combat. Here he moves all of his equipment over to Rograkh thanks to Ardenn's ability. Knowing he'll need some help to take down Martin and I, Nick makes a temporary truce with Asher, and so ends his turn without attacking.
I draw 3 cards and lose 2 life, and then cycle a Lonely Sandbar to draw another card. I then cast Cerulean Sphinx and target Alex with my Sphinx or Fiction trigger. With this I put Terrain Generator, Burnished Heart and an island into my hand. I then play the island, move my shoes over to my Cerulean Sphinx and move to combat. Here I attack Alex for exactly 9 damage.
Wow, it's going to be like that, is it?
It is.
Well, in that case, I cast Path to Exile targeting Unesh.
How rude. Unesh is put back into the command zone, and I search my library for an island and put it into play tapped. Alex then loses 5 life and goes down to 4. Deeply saddened by Alex's actions, I pass the turn.
Asher draws 2 more cards and loses 2 life, and then plays a Swamp for turn. He then equips his sword to his ape and moves to combat. Here he attacks me with his 5/5 token, which I'm unable to block given that it has protection from red. I unfortunately do a die, Asher gains 6 life from his sword, and then moves to his second main phase. Asher casts a Font of Mythos, so now everyone draws 5 cards a turn. He then activates his scroll rack before also casting Horn of Greed. Ensuring no one will ever run out of cards, Asher ends his turn.
Nick starts his turn by drawing 5 cards overall and loses 2 life. He then plays a mountain and draws another card, and then casts a Grafted Exoskeleton. Wanting more equipment, Nick also casts a Shadow Spear and then moves to combat. Here he uses Ardenn's ability to equip his new weapons to his commander and then declares an attack at me.
Ha!
I, not wanting to die, cast Ether Spouts in response to this. Nick chooses to put Rograkh on top of his library, and then, plans foiled, Nick turns his sights to Asher, casting Darksteel Mutation targeting his commander. Seizan is transformed into a 0/1 indestructible insect, and Nick then ends his turn.
In Martin's turn, he draws 3 cards and loses no life, now that Seizan is a little buggy boy. He then casts Semblance Anvil, putting Burnished Heart underneath it, making both his artifacts and, more importantly, creatures cost 2 less.
Value.
Using this, he casts Sphinx of Enlightenment, having Asher draw a card with its ETB. Martin then draws 3 cards and, for its Surge cost, casts Jawar Isle Avenger. Moving to combat, he puts the shoes on his very shiny Sphinx and attacks Nick for 10 damage. With no flyers on board, Nick takes the damage and Martin passes to Asher.
Asher draws an additional 2 cards and then moves to combat, attacking Nick with his sword-wielding ape. Unable to block given that it has protection from white and red, Nick has to take the 5 damage and then 7 more damage with the sword's trigger, knocking him out of the game. Asher gains 8 life this way, and then moves to his second main phase. Here he casts Mind Twist, where X is 11. Not liking the sound of this, I ask Asher if he would like a bird token instead, and cast a cheeky swan song. Mind Twist is countered, and Asher adds another token to his menagerie. Plans foiled, he passes to me. However, Asher having a flying blocker is super inconvenient for me, so I cast Rapid Hybridization on the bird to instead make it a 3/3 frog lizard. With no further interruptions, I move to my turn.
With Nick now out of the game, Seizan is turned back to his pure form, and Martin is back to drawing 5 cards and losing 2 life. He then plays an arm to draw once more from Horn of Greed before casting Sphinx of Athun, who comes with his own slightly better Sphinx or Fiction trigger. Asher, being the only other player left, chooses the piles. Here Martin puts Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, Majoring Network, and 2 islands into his hand. Needing more cheapening effects, Martin plays Kefnet's Monument. Costing 3 less mana, Martin casts Alhamrit, High Arbiter. With his ETB, Martin looks at Asher's hand and names Archfiend of Depravity. With the Kefnet's Monument trigger, Martin also prevents Asher from untapping his sword-wielding token next turn. Moving to combat, Martin attacks Asher for 18 damage with 4 Sphinxes. Asher uses his spines to untap and removes Martin's shiny Sphinx from combat. With no other responses, Asher takes the 13 damage and Martin moves to his main 2. Here he casts a Laboratory Maniac and ends his turn.
Asher draws 5 cards and loses 2 life. He then plays a Cabal Coffers, drawing another land from his horn. Tapping his Sol Ring and Coffers, Asher generates 8 black mana and uses one of it to activate his Scroll Rack, this time setting aside 9 cards. He draws 9 new cards and then uses his floating mana to cast Myosian of Night's Reach. The spirit enters with a divinity counter on it, which Asher immediately removes to make me discard my hand. From this, Asher gains 12 black mana, 5 2/2 zombies, and draws 5 cards thanks to Waste Not. Using the rest of his mana, Asher casts Torment of Hailfire, where X is 17. Having no cards in hand, I sacrifice 8 non-land permanents, lowering me down to 1 life. Really wanting me dead this turn, Asher casts Wound Reflection, ensuring that I become very, very dead, thus winning him the game.
And a win out of nowhere. Congratulations to Asher, commiserations to Nick, and less commiserations to Martin. I really hate that deck. I'm gonna play creatures in mono blue with limited counter magic. Honestly, as a blue mage at heart, it quite frankly makes me sick. And that will be the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this type of content, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment below. We read every single one of them. Thank you again to Asher and Nick for joining us for this game. If you would like to appear on the channel with Martin and I, then be sure to check out our Patreon link in the description box below. You can also follow us on Twitter or over at Facebook to check up on our channel's activity. But all's left for me to say is that, well, as always, I've been Alex, and I will see you next time.